Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back way back over 3,000 years to a land bathed in golden sunlight where the rhythm of life was dictated by the mighty Nile. Imagine the sun, a fiery orb beginning its slow descent over the ancient sprawling city of Memphis, casting long dramatic shadows from colossal temples and bustling marketplaces. You're there standing on the sun-baked earth, feeling the last warmth of the day dissipate into the evening air. The scent of incense, a hint of cooking fires, and the faint sweet smell of papyrus drift on a gentle breeze. As the stars impossibly bright and numerous begin to prickle the inky sky, you realize that for all the monumental grandeur of ancient Egypt, something remarkably universal is about to unfold bedtime. You might be thinking, what's so special about sleep in ancient Egypt? Isn't it just sleep? And you'd be right in a sense. But you'd also be very, very wrong. Because while the act of falling asleep is universal, the rituals surrounding it, the anxieties, the comforts, and even the dangers were deeply intertwined with the very fabric of their world. You probably wouldn't survive a single night there without a healthy dose of modern insect repellent for a start. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to think about people tuning in from all corners of the globe, maybe as the sun is rising for some, or just getting ready to set for others. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the last sliver of the sun dips below the horizon, painting the western sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, a noticeable shift occurs in the ancient Egyptian household. The intense heat of the day, which can be quite oppressive, begins to give way to a more tolerable warmth than a gentle coolness that invites relaxation. You, as an inhabitant of this ancient land, feel the day's labor start to recede. Perhaps you've been tending fields of emmer wheat or shaping clay into pots, or maybe you've been haggling in the bustling market for a fresh catch from the Nile. Whatever your daily toil, your body recognizes the signals, the lengthening shadows, the softening light, the rising sounds of nocturnal creatures. For the ancient Egyptians, life was deeply connected to the natural rhythms of the sun. The sun god Ra was central to their cosmology, governing the cycle of day and night, life and death. So as Ra began his journey into the underworld each evening, it wasn't just a physical change from light to dark, it was a spiritual transition. This wasn't a time for frantic activity, but for winding down, for preparing both body and spirit for the symbolic death of sleep and the promise of rebirth with the morning sun. You wouldn't find them burning the midnight oil, as we might say, trying to squeeze in extra work. The darkness was a time for rest, for contemplation, and for the mysterious world of dreams to unfold. One of the mainstream historical facts that underpins this understanding is the concept of Duat, the Egyptian underworld. While primarily associated with the afterlife, the journey through the Duat was also symbolically mirrored in the nightly descent of the sun god, and by extension, the human experience of sleep. When you closed your eyes, you were, in a very subtle way, embarking on a mini journey through this mystical realm. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? That your everyday slumber was seen as a brief nightly echo of the grand cosmic cycle. This belief imbued sleep with a much deeper significance than simply recharging your batteries. It was a time of vulnerability, but also a time of potential spiritual insight. Now, for a quirky tidbit, did you know that the ancient Egyptians were pioneers in timekeeping, primarily to track these celestial movements? They developed water clocks, or clepsydras, which measured time by the steady drip of water from one vessel to another. Imagine, as the light fades, you might hear the gentle rhythmic plink-plonk of a water clock in a nearby temple or a wealthy household, a soothing ambient sound marking the passage of time toward your rest. These weren't just scientific instruments. They were subtle reminders of the unfolding natural order, a soft countdown to the world of dreams. Historians still argue whether the common Egyptian household universally observed these symbolic connections to the Duat with every nightly sleep, or if it was primarily a belief more prevalent among the priestly class and the elite. It's easy to project our modern understanding of sleep onto ancient cultures, but their relationship with consciousness and the unconscious was far more intricate, woven into their religious and philosophical beliefs. Regardless, the approaching darkness was a signal, a cue for a change of pace, a transition from the active world of the living to the more introspective, vulnerable state of sleep. You might start by washing away the dust and grime of the day, perhaps with water from the Nile itself brought in by servants or fetched by family members, a small yet significant ritual of cleansing before the quiet hours. As the last of the day's light fades, your attention turns inward toward the home. For the ancient Egyptians, preparing for sleep wasn't just about finding a place to lie down. It was about preparing your personal space, a sanctuary against the perceived dangers of the night. You'd move through your modest home, perhaps a mud brick dwelling, with thick walls designed to insulate against the sun's harsh rays, now slowly releasing the stored warmth into the cooler evening air. This wasn't some grand temple, mind you, but a functional lived-in space often shared with extended family, sometimes even livestock depending on your social standing. Imagine the soft rustle of straw mats being unrolled, the quiet clinking of pottery as water jars are filled for the night, and the gentle murmur of voices as families gather. This pre-sleep routine often involves simple acts of domesticity that, while mundane to us, were integral to their sense of security and well-being. You might ensure the main door is secured perhaps with a simple wooden bar or a rope lock. Remember, there wasn't a neighborhood watch back then, and while serious crime might not have been rampant, the perceived threats of the unknown of spirits and creatures of the night were very real. So a secure home was a safe haven. You might also notice the air thick with the smell of dried reeds and perhaps a faint smoky scent from the small cooking fire that had been used for the evening meal. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant role of domestic altars or shrines within ancient Egyptian homes. Almost every household, regardless of wealth, would have a small area dedicated to household deities or deceased ancestors. Before turning in for the night, you might offer a small prayer, perhaps light a tiny oil lamp, or leave a humble offering of food or water. This wasn't just a religious act. It was a way of invoking protection, of reassuring yourself and your family that benevolent forces were watching over you as you entered the vulnerable state of sleep. It was their equivalent of checking all the locks and setting the alarm, but with a touch more spiritual flair. Now, for a quirky tidbit, while we think of ancient homes as being quite basic, archaeologists have found evidence of what appear to be ancient Egyptian air fresheners or scent diffusers. These might have been simple clay bowls filled with aromatic herbs like frankincense or myrrh, or perhaps even cones of perfumed fat that would slowly melt and release their scent in the warmth of the home. Imagine the subtle, soothing aroma wafting through your sleeping quarters, perhaps designed not just to smell pleasant, but also to ward off unwelcome spirits or insects, acting as a kind of ancient organic bug spray and aromatherapy all in one. It's certainly more natural than some of the chemical sprays we use today, if perhaps less effective against a determined mosquito. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these household shrines indicates a deeply personal and accessible form of religious practice for the common folk, or if it was more of a superficial adherence to broader, state-sponsored religious norms. Did every person genuinely believe in the efficacy of these tiny altars, or was it simply habit? Regardless, the act of preparing your home for the night was a multi-layered affair, blending practicality with a profound sense of spiritual preparedness. You wouldn't just flop onto your bed, you'd consciously transition your environment from the active, outward-facing world of day to the quiet, inward-facing world of night. The soft glow of oil lamps, perhaps made from simple pottery with a flax wick, would cast dancing shadows on the mud brick walls, creating a sense of intimacy and calm. The sounds of the day, the distant chatter of vendors, the braying of donkeys, the splash of the Nile, would fade, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of reeds in the gentle night breeze. It's a remarkably tactile and sensory experience, this slow, deliberate winding down in a world without electric light or constant noise. With the home prepared and the household deities acknowledged, your thoughts would naturally turn to the architecture of sleep itself. Ancient Egyptian homes, whether grand estates or humble dwellings, were built with the climate and daily life in mind, and that extended to how they facilitated rest. You'd typically find yourself in a house made of sun-dried mud bricks, a material that might sound primitive, but was remarkably effective at keeping the interiors cool during the sweltering day and relatively warm during the cooler desert nights. Imagine the thick, earthy scent of the walls, a subtle aroma that's both grounding and comforting as darkness falls. The floors might be packed earth or simple straw mats, providing a cool surface during the day, though perhaps less appealing as a bed. The layout of these homes was often quite practical. You might have a central courtyard open to the sky, which served as a communal area for many activities, but also allowed for air circulation. Sleeping areas, especially for the common folk, weren't necessarily segregated into dedicated bedrooms as we understand them. Instead, open spaces or slightly partitioned alcoves might serve as sleeping quarters, especially during the hot summer months when sleeping on the roof under the vast canopy of stars was a common and much appreciated practice. Picture yourself ascending a simple external staircase to the flat roof, the evening breeze a welcome relief after the day's heat, the stars beginning to blaze in the clear, unpolluted sky above the Nile. It's a natural form of air conditioning, really, and certainly more comfortable than a stuffy interior. A mainstream historical fact about these homes is that the vast majority of the population lived in surprisingly compact multi-story dwellings, even if they were relatively modest. While the elite had sprawling villas with numerous rooms and expansive gardens, the average Egyptian family would live in a house that maximized vertical space, often with a ground floor for storage and animals, and upper floors for living and sleeping. This verticality was a clever use of limited space, particularly in dense urban centers, like Tel El Amarna or Thebes. You'd probably find yourself climbing a narrow, steep staircase to reach your sleeping area, the sounds of the household, perhaps children already asleep, or a quiet conversation, drifting up from below. For a quirky tidbit, consider the ingenious ventilation systems some of these homes employed, particularly in the larger dwellings of the wealthy. They sometimes used wind catchers or malkoffs, funnel-shaped structures, built into the roof that would capture prevailing breezes and direct cool air down into the rooms below. Think of it as a natural passive air conditioning system, a very early form of climate control. So even on a warm evening, you might feel a gentle, continuous flow of air through your sleeping space, a subtle, almost imperceptible hum of the ancient world's climate engineering. It's certainly more aesthetically pleasing than a rattling window unit. Historians still argue whether the concept of privacy, particularly concerning sleeping arrangements, was a significant concern for the average ancient Egyptian, or if the communal nature of their living spaces meant that personal solitude was a largely modern invention. Were these open sleeping areas a matter of necessity due to limited space, or did they reflect a cultural preference for close family proximity, even in sleep? Regardless, your nightly ritual of preparing for rest was intrinsically linked to the architecture and climate of your home, a seamless integration of human needs and environmental realities. As the city lights of ancient times would have been virtually non-existent, compared to our modern world, the darkness would have been profound, making the stars and the moon the primary source of illumination. This deep darkness would have naturally encouraged an earlier bedtime, guiding you into a deep, uninterrupted slumber. Having prepared your home and yourself for the coming night, your attention would then settle on the very surface you'd be sleeping on. Forget plush mattresses or memory foam. In ancient Egypt, your bed was likely a far more rudimentary affair, though not without its own functional elegance. For the common Egyptian, sleep often meant simply unrolling a reed mat or a woven textile directly onto the packed earth floor. Imagine the dry, earthy scent of the mat, perhaps still carrying a hint of the day's sun as you smooth it out. It's a connection to the earth, a direct interface with the very ground that sustained their civilization. For those with a bit more means, a simple bed frame might have been available. These were often low rectangular wooden frames, sometimes with intricately carved legs for the wealthy, but typically just plain for most. Instead of springs or a mattress, these frames would have a woven platform of reeds or rope stretched across them, creating a surprisingly firm but slightly yielding surface. It sounds rather hard to our modern sensibilities, accustomed as we are to layers of softness, but it would have offered crucial elevation from the sometimes damp or insect-ridden floor. You might hear the gentle creak of the rope or reeds as you settle your weight onto it, a subtle acoustic cue that you are truly preparing for rest. A mainstream historical fact here is that despite the simplicity of their sleeping surfaces, the Egyptians understood the importance of elevation for comfort and hygiene. Even the poorest might try to raise their sleeping area slightly, perhaps by placing a few bricks or stones under the mat. This wasn't just about avoiding drafts. It was about protecting oneself from scorpion snakes and other unwelcome creatures that preferred to slither or crawl on the ground. So that slightly elevated bed wasn't a luxury, it was a practical matter of survival. It's almost like a very low-tech version of a pest control system, only you're the bait, or rather, the unattractive option. Now for a quirky tidbit about their bedding, while we might envision heavy blankets, the ancient Egyptians primarily used linen sheets, or light coverings. Linen made from the flax plant was incredibly versatile and widely used. It's breathable, which is essential in a warm climate, and it can be woven into various thicknesses. So on cooler nights, you might have a thicker linen sheet to draw over you, while on warmer evenings, a sheer, almost translucent piece would suffice. Imagine the cool, crisp feel of fresh linen against your skin, a simple comfort in a world of fewer material possessions. Historians still argue whether the distinct lack of heavy wool blankets in common Egyptian households indicates a preference for lighter coverings due to the climate, or if it simply reflects the relative scarcity or cost of wool production compared to abundant flax. It's hard to imagine enduring a truly cold desert night with just a thin sheet, but perhaps their bodies were just more accustomed to it. Regardless, the bedding was designed for practicality and comfort within their specific climate, a testament to their ingenuity. You'd likely smooth out your chosen covering, perhaps giving it a good shake to dislodge any lingering dust or, heaven forbid, a tiny scorpion that might have sought refuge within its folds during the day. The simple act of spreading your linen, feeling its texture, would be a familiar, calming part of your transition to sleep. Having prepared your home and yourself for the coming night, your attention would then settle on the very surface you'd be sleeping on. Forget plush mattresses or memory foam. In ancient Egypt, your bed was likely a far more rudimentary affair, though not without its own functional elegance. For the common Egyptian, sleep often meant simply unrolling a reed mat or a woven textile directly onto the packed earth floor. Imagine the dry, earthy scent of the mat, perhaps still carrying a hint of the day's sun as you smooth it out. It's a connection to the earth, a direct interface with the very ground that sustained their civilization. For those with a bit more means, a simple bed frame might have been available. These were often low rectangular wooden frames, sometimes with intricately carved legs for the wealthy, but typically just plain for most. Instead of springs or a mattress, these frames would have a woven platform of reeds or rope stretched across them, creating a surprisingly firm but slightly yielding surface. It sounds rather hard to our modern sensibilities, accustomed as we are to layers of softness, but it would have offered crucial elevation from the sometimes damp or insect-ridden floor. You might hear the gentle creak of the rope or reeds as you settle your weight onto it, a subtle acoustic cue that you are truly preparing for rest. A mainstream historical fact here is that despite the simplicity of their sleeping surfaces, the Egyptians understood the importance of elevation for comfort and hygiene. Even the poorest might try to raise their sleeping area slightly, perhaps, by placing a few bricks or stones under the mat. This wasn't just about avoiding drafts. It was about protecting oneself from scorpion snakes and other unwelcome creatures that preferred to slither or crawl on the ground. So that slightly elevated bed wasn't a luxury, it was a practical matter of survival. It's almost like a very low-tech version of a pest control system, only you're the bait, or rather, the unattractive option. Now for a quirky tidbit about their bedding, while we might envision heavy blankets, the ancient Egyptians primarily used linen sheets or light coverings. Linen made from the flax plant was incredibly versatile and widely used. It's breathable, which is essential in a warm climate, and it can be woven into various thicknesses. So on cooler nights, you might have a thicker linen sheet to draw over you, while on warmer evenings, a sheer, almost translucent piece would suffice. Imagine the cool, crisp feel of fresh linen against your skin, a simple comfort in a world of fewer material possessions. Historians still argue whether the distinct lack of heavy wool blankets in common Egyptian households indicates a preference for lighter coverings due to the climate, or if it simply reflects the relative scarcity or cost of wool production compared to abundant flax. It's hard to imagine enduring a truly cold desert night with just a thin sheet, but perhaps their bodies were just more accustomed to it. Regardless, the bedding was designed for practicality and comfort within their specific climate, a testament to their ingenuity. You'd likely smooth out your chosen covering, perhaps giving it a good shake to dislodge any lingering dust or, heaven forbid, a tiny scorpion that might have sought refuge within its folds during the day. The simple act of spreading your linen, feeling its texture, would be a familiar calming part of your transition to sleep. Now let's talk about the pillow. If you're imagining a soft, fluffy cushion, you'd be sorely mistaken about ancient Egyptian sleep. Their version was, by our standards, quite the opposite, a calm headrest. Picture a small curved piece of wood, sometimes alabaster or even ivory for the very wealthy, designed to cradle the back of your neck and elevate your head. It looks more like a miniature stool or a bizarre piece of modern art than something you'd willingly rest your head on for 8 hours. You'd carefully position it, feeling the hard, smooth surface against your skin, a far cry from the sink-in comfort of a feather pillow. The primary purpose of this headrest wasn't comfort, as we understand it, but rather practicality. For one, it helped maintain elaborate hairstyles, preventing them from being flattened or disheveled during the night. Imagine waking up with your carefully braided hair still perfectly intact, a minor triumph in a world without hairspray. More importantly, however, these headrests were crucial for my ventilation. In a hot climate, elevating the head allowed air to circulate around the neck and head, helping to dissipate heat and keep you cooler, a simple yet effective strategy for staying comfortable in the often stifling Egyptian nights. It's certainly more effective than flipping your pillow to the cool side every 5 minutes. A mainstream historical fact is that these headrests were often beautifully decorated, particularly those belonging to the elite. They might be carved with protective symbols, hieroglyphs, or even images of deities associated with sleep and dreams, like Bes the dwarf god, who was a protector of the household and children, or Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth and fertility, often invoked for protection. So your pillow wasn't just a utilitarian object. It was a small piece of protective art watching over your vulnerable slumber. For a quirky tidbit, some scholars believe these headrests also served a symbolic purpose in relation to the sun, god Ra's nightly journey. By elevating the head, it was thought to keep the individual spirit slightly separate from the earthly plane, allowing it to potentially interact more freely with the spiritual realm during sleep. It was almost like a gentle liftoff for your soul as it embarked on its nightly adventures. Historians still argue whether the primary function of these headrests was purely practical hygiene, hair preservation, cooling, or if the symbolic and religious aspects played an equally, if not more, significant role in their widespread adoption. Did they simply provide a better night's rest, or did they also provide spiritual reassurance? Regardless, the sensation of resting your head on one of these firm sculpted objects would have been entirely different from our modern experience. A subtle yet constant reminder of the distinct differences in their approach to comfort and sleep. You might feel the cool wood against your neck, providing a small but welcome relief from any lingering heat, and the slight pressure might even feel grounding in a strange way, a direct physical connection to the craftsmanship of the ancient world. Even with your simple mat and curious headrest, the ancient Egyptian night presented a unique set of challenges that no amount of linen or carved wood could fully mitigate: the relentless onslaught of pests. You might be settling down, perhaps feeling a gentle breeze, but then a familiar buzz would break the calm. Mosquitoes, flies, and a host of other biting insects were an inescapable part of life along the Nile, and bedtime offered no true reprieve. Imagine the faint, high-pitched whine near your ear, the annoying tickle as something crawls across your bare arm. This wasn't just an irritation. It was a genuine health concern in a world without modern medicine. The Egyptians, however, were not without their defenses. They employed various strategies, some more effective than others, to keep these nocturnal nuisances at bay. You might notice small bowls of mirari shoma, animal fat mixed with aromatic herbs, burning slowly nearby. The smoke and scent intended to deter insects. Perhaps a more common method, especially for the well-to-do, involves draping fine linen nets around their sleeping areas, an early form of mosquito netting. Picture the delicate, almost translucent fabric creating a protective cocoon around you, offering a fragile barrier against the buzzing hordes. It's certainly more aesthetically pleasing than the standard camping mesh we use today. A mainstream historical fact is that the Egyptians were remarkably adept at using natural repellents. They understood that certain plants, when burned or applied, could deter insects. Evidence from tombs and temples shows depictions of rituals involving aromatic resins and plants, suggesting a long-standing knowledge of their properties. While not a perfect solution, these methods provided some measure of relief from the constant buzzing and biting. It was a constant battle, though one that could seriously disrupt your sleep if you weren't vigilant. For a quirky tidbit to combat the common housefly, which was not just annoying, but also a carrier of disease, the Egyptians sometimes kept hyenas, or mongooses, as household pets. Imagine having a hyena padding around your home, not just for companionship, but as an organic four-legged fly swatter. While this might sound rather extreme for pest control, it highlights the desperate measures they might have taken. Historians still argue whether these animals were truly effective at pest control on a large scale, or if their presence was more symbolic, perhaps a display of wealth or a quirky preference. Did the average Egyptian household really want a hyena in the kitchen? Or was this a luxury limited to a very few eccentric elites? Regardless, the fight against pests was real, and it shaped how Egyptians prepared for their nightly rest, reminding you that sometimes the biggest threat to a good night's sleep isn't a loud neighbor, but a persistent mosquito. As you lay on your simple bed, perhaps under a protective linen net, the sounds of the ancient Egyptian night would slowly envelop you. Unlike our modern world filled with the constant hum of electricity traffic and distant sirens, the ancient night was dominated by natural acoustics. You wouldn't hear the drone of an airplane overhead or the distant throb of a bass line from a neighbor's party. Instead, your ears would attune to a different symphony, one that had been playing for millennia along the banks of the Nile. The most prominent sound, almost a constant backdrop, would be the gentle rhythmic lapping of the Nile's waters. Whether you lived directly on the riverbank or a short distance away, the river was the lifeblood of Egypt, and its presence was a constant soothing auditory reminder. You might hear the faint splash of a fishing boat returning late, or the soft dip of an oar. This natural white noise would be incredibly calming, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the modern world. Imagine the subtle whispers of the wind rustling through papyrus reeds, a sound like soft sighs guiding you deeper into relaxation. A mainstream historical fact is that the Nile wasn't just a source of water and sustenance. It was also a major transportation artery. Even at night, some activity would continue, albeit at a reduced pace. You might hear the distant calls of ferrymen or the gentle creak of ropes as boats were moored for the night. These sounds, far from being disruptive, would have been part of the familiar nighttime soundscape, a comforting reassurance that life, even in the darkness, continued its gentle rhythm. For a quirky tidbit, consider the chorus of desert animals. While we often think of the desert as silent at night, it comes alive. You might hear the distant howl of a jackal or the chirping of crickets and cicadas in an unending natural symphony. Perhaps the rustle of a small lizard skittering across the packed earth floor, or the soft hoot of an owl from a nearby tree. These sounds, unsettling to some modern ears, would have been deeply familiar to the ancient Egyptians, part of the natural world they inhabited. It's certainly more authentic than any nature sounds app. Historians still argue whether the presence of wild animals so close to human habitations was a source of constant anxiety, or if Egyptians simply coexisted with them, perhaps viewing them as part of the natural order to be respected or even feared. Was every rustle a potential threat or just another sound in the night? Regardless, the sounds of the night were a profound part of the ancient Egyptian sleep experience, drawing you deeper into a state of awareness that eventually gave way to unconsciousness, a transition guided by the subtle harmonies of their world. As the gentle sounds of the ancient night lulled you, a different kind of world would begin to unfold within your mind, the realm of our dreams. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams were far more than just random neural firings. They were considered messages, often divine, offering glimpses into the future, warnings, or even guidance from the gods or deceased ancestors. You weren't simply dreaming, you were potentially communing with another plane of existence, a nocturnal journey into the spiritual landscape. This belief in the significance of dreams meant that they weren't simply dismissed upon waking. Instead, they were often meticulously remembered, discussed, and even interpreted. Imagine waking from a particularly vivid dream, perhaps seeing a falcon, or a flood, or a specific deity. Your first thought wouldn't be, "What did I eat last night?" but rather, "What does this mean?" This societal emphasis on dream interpretation created a fascinating aspect of their daily lives. A mainstream historical fact is the existence of the dream books, or dream guides. Scribes would compile collections of dream interpretations, offering explanations for various symbols and scenarios that appeared in dreams. These texts, sometimes found on papyri, would act as a kind of ancient decoder ring for your nighttime visions. So if you dreamt of a cat, for example, you might consult a dream book to understand its potential meaning, which could be anything from good fortune to a warning about an enemy. It's like having a universal dream dictionary, only instead of trying to figure out what your subconscious is telling you, you're trying to figure out what the gods are telling you. For a quirky tidbit, some particularly significant or troubling dreams might even prompt a visit to a Crown or dream temple. These specialized temples associated with specific deities were places where individuals could go to incubate dreams. That is, to intentionally sleep there in the hope of receiving a divine message or a cure for an ailment through a dream. Imagine journeying to a sacred site, settling down among strangers, all with the shared purpose of receiving a prophetic dream. Historians still argue whether these dream temples were primarily used by the elite and priestly class, or if they were accessible to the common Egyptian seeking divine intervention. Was it a form of ancient therapy or a ritualistic experience reserved for the privileged few? Regardless, the very concept highlights the profound respect and spiritual weight the ancient Egyptians placed on their dreamscapes, making your nightly slumber not just a physical necessity, but a potential conduit to the divine. With dreams carrying such spiritual weight, it's no surprise that the ancient Egyptians invoked specific gods and goddesses to protect them during the vulnerability of sleep. As you prepared to drift off, you wouldn't just rely on your secure door or your headrest. You'd also appeal to a pantheon of deities whose powers extended into the nocturnal realm. Imagine whispering a short prayer, perhaps lighting a small votive lamp before an image of a protective god seeking their benevolent gaze over your slumber. One of the most popular and endearing of these protective deities was Batur, a dwarf god with a rather comical leonine face, often depicted with a large head and a protruding tongue. Despite his slightly grotesque appearance, Bes was immensely popular, associated with music, dancing, and pleasure. But most importantly, he was a fierce protector of the household, especially women and children during childbirth, and crucially during sleep. You might find small amulets or figurines of Bes placed near your sleeping area, their presence intended to scare away nightmares, evil spirits, and even dangerous animals. It's like having a tiny, fierce, yet oddly comforting guardian angel by your bedside, except he's a bit more unconventional. Another significant figure invoked for protection during sleep was Taweret Aritonina, the hippopotamus goddess. She was depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright with pendulous breasts and the limbs of a lion, often with a crocodile's back. Like Bes, Taweret was primarily a goddess of childbirth and fertility, but her protective qualities extended to the vulnerable state of sleep, especially for expectant mothers and children. Her formidable appearance was believed to ward off evil. You might see her image on everyday objects or as an amulet, providing a sense of security as you close your eyes. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread use of amulets in ancient Egypt. These small charms, often made of faience stone or metal, were worn on the body or placed in homes to provide protection against various threats, both seen and unseen. For sleep amulets depicting Bes, Taweret, or symbols like the Ujat Ii of Horus, were particularly common, acting as tangible expressions of faith and a desire for peaceful rest. It's the ancient equivalent of a nightlight, only with more spiritual power. For a quirky tidbit, some Egyptians would even draw magical symbols or short protective spells on the palms of their hands before going to sleep, believing this would prevent malevolent forces from entering their bodies or minds during dreams. Imagine gently tracing a hieroglyph or a symbol onto your skin just before drifting off a deeply personal and intimate ritual of self-protection. Historians still argue whether the common folk genuinely believed in the literal efficacy of these amulets and spells, or if they were more comforting psychological tools, providing a sense of agency and control in a world that often felt unpredictable. Did a Bes amulet truly ward off evil, or did it simply help you feel safer? Regardless, the act of invoking these deities and deploying these protective measures was an integral part of the ancient Egyptians' nightly routine, a quiet reassurance that even in the vulnerability of unconsciousness, powerful forces watched over them. Even with protective deities and amulets, the ancient Egyptian experience of sleep wasn't always serene. Just like us, they faced the unwelcome intrusion of sickness and insomnia. Imagine the frustration of lying awake on your firm headrest, the sounds of the night no longer soothing but irritating your mind racing, perhaps battling a fever or the gnawing discomfort of a lingering ailment. In a world without modern medicine, such nights could be terrifying, with sleeplessness often attributed to malevolent spirits or an imbalance within the body. The Egyptians, being remarkably observant, developed a range of remedies for sleeplessness and other nighttime discomforts. While some of these might sound rather bizarre to our modern ears, others show a surprising intuitive understanding of herbal medicine. You might find yourself being given a concoction of nyan poppy juice, a potent sleep aid that would certainly knock you out, though perhaps with some unintended side effects. They understood the sedative properties of certain plants long before pharmaceutical companies existed. It's their version of a very strong sleepy time tea, only less likely to be found at your local grocery store. A mainstream historical fact is the advanced state of ancient Egyptian medicine, particularly their knowledge of herbal remedies. Papyrus scrolls like the Ebers Papyrus document numerous prescriptions for a variety of ailments, including those affecting sleep. These texts reveal a systematic approach to diagnosis and treatment, even if their understanding of disease causes was often intertwined with spiritual beliefs. So if you were tossing and turning, a physician-priest might consult such a text to find a suitable remedy for your sleeplessness. For a quirky tidbit, some remedies for insomnia involved rather unusual ingredients. For instance, there are hints in some texts about applying crocodile dung to the body as a cure for certain skin conditions or ailments, which might have indirectly been associated with discomfort that led to sleeplessness. While it sounds incredibly unpleasant, it reflects a trial and error approach to medicine, where anything with a perceived efficacy, no matter how unsavory, might be attempted. Historians still argue whether some of these extreme or seemingly unsanitary remedies were genuinely believed to be effective, or if they were more superstitious practices passed down through generations without true empirical evidence. Did the crocodile dung actually do anything, or was it just so horrible you'd fall asleep from sheer exhaustion or disgust? Regardless, the struggle against sleeplessness and illness was a very real part of the ancient Egyptian night, and they employed every tool at their disposal, from the divine to the disgusting, to find that elusive peace. While adults navigated their own sleep challenges, the ancient Egyptian night held a special, gentler set of rituals for children. Imagine the scene: the day's heat has finally broken, the sounds of the household are softening, and the little ones are beginning to nod off. For a child in ancient Egypt, bedtime wasn't just about closing their eyes. It was a time for soothing, for protection, and for entering a world of safe dreams. Parents would often cradle their children, perhaps telling stories or softly singing lullabies. While we don't have many surviving examples of exact lullaby lyrics, we can imagine they would have been simple, repetitive tunes, perhaps invoking protective deities or referencing the calming flow of the Nile. The rhythm of a parent's voice, the gentle sway, these are universal comforts across time and cultures. You might hear the soft, shushing sounds, the murmur of ancient Egyptian words meant to ease a child into slumber. It's a timeless scene, truly, that connects us directly to these long-lost people. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant role of protective amulets, specifically for children. Babies and young children were often adorned with a variety of charms, much like the adults, but with a particular emphasis on guarding against evil spirits, illness, and bad dreams. These might include amulets of Bes, the dwarf god, or Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, both fierce yet benevolent figures. Imagine a tiny amulet, perhaps a Phaeon's hippopotamus, gently swinging from a child's neck, a tangible symbol of their parents' desire for their peaceful sleep. For a quirky tidbit, some archaeological finds suggest that Egyptian children had toys that might have been part of their bedtime routines. Small mirrored animal figures, made from wood or clay, or even miniature beds, could have been used for play that mimicked adult activities, perhaps helping children process their day or prepare for sleep. Imagine a small child clutching a beloved wooden lion as they drift off to sleep, finding comfort in their own small familiar guardian. Historians still argue whether these child-specific protective measures were purely superstitious or if they also served a crucial psychological function, providing a sense of security to both the child and the anxious parent in a world full of unknown dangers. Did the amulet really protect, or did it simply help everyone believe they were safe? Regardless, the ancient Egyptian bedtime for children was a blend of practical care and spiritual reassurance, a quiet, loving transition into the world of dreams. While most Egyptians shared similar bedtime rituals, the pharaoh's slumber was an entirely different affair, imbued with immense symbolic and practical significance. You wouldn't find the ruler of Egypt on a simple reed mat. Their sleep was a sacred act deeply intertwined with the stability of the entire kingdom. Imagine the opulence of the royal palace, the soft rustle of expensive linen, the faint scent of rare perfumes and costly incense drifting through the air. The pharaoh's rest was not just about personal rejuvenation, it was about the continued cosmic order. The pharaoh's bed, if it could even be called, that in our sense would have been an elaborate, intricately carved structure, often made of ebony or gilded wood, perhaps even adorned with precious metals and stones. It would have been more of a throne for sleep, a symbol of divine authority, even in unconsciousness. The linens would have been of the finest quality, imported from distant lands, reflecting the pharaoh's unparalleled status. You might imagine a personal attendant standing silently nearby, ready to cater to any need, a stark contrast to the self-reliance of the average Egyptian. A mainstream historical fact is the concept of the pharaoh as a divine king, a living God who bridged the human and divine realms. This belief extended to their sleep, which was seen as a vital period for communion with the gods and for the renewal of divine energy needed to govern effectively. Every night as the sun god Ra traversed the underworld, the pharaoh was symbolically participating in this journey, ensuring the sun's return and the prosperity of Egypt. This made the pharaoh's personal slumber a matter of national security almost. For a quirky tidbit, some texts suggest that the pharaoh might have had specific dedicated dream interpreters on staff, perhaps even high-ranking priests whose sole job was to analyze the ruler's dreams for omens or divine messages that could impact state policy. Imagine having a professional dream reader on call 24/7, deciphering your subconscious for the good of the kingdom. Historians still argue whether the elaborate nature of the pharaoh's sleeping arrangements and rituals was primarily driven by genuine spiritual belief, or if it was also a powerful form of political theater, reinforcing the ruler's divine status in the eyes of the populace. Was it deeply held faith or just really good propaganda? Regardless, the pharaoh's slumber was a complex tapestry of personal rest, spiritual significance, and political power, a profound symbol of the ancient Egyptian world. Beyond humans and the occasional household hyena, the ancient Egyptian home was often shared with a variety of war animal companions, both domesticated and wild, and their presence would have been an integral part of the nighttime soundscape and atmosphere. You might hear the soft rustle of a cat stretching in the darkness, or the lowing of a cow from a nearby enclosure. These creatures weren't just resources. They were often members of the household, contributing to the overall sense of life and security. Cats in particular held a revered status in ancient Egypt, not just for their elegance, but also for their prowess as pest controllers. Imagine a sleek feline, a descendant of the wild African cat, silently patrolling your home at night, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight as it stalks a mouse or a scorpion. Their presence would have provided a practical form of pest control, but also a comforting rhythmic purr from time to time as they settled down to sleep themselves. It's certainly more natural than those sticky fly traps. A mainstream historical fact is the profound religious significance of many animals in ancient Egypt. Cats were associated with the goddess Bastet cows, with Hathor, and various birds and reptiles with other deities. This meant that many animals were treated with respect, sometimes even reverence beyond their utilitarian purposes. So the animals sharing your home weren't just background noise. They were often seen as embodying aspects of the divine or bringing good fortune. For a quirky tidbit, some Egyptians kept monkeys, or baboons as pets animals known for their intelligence and playful nature. Imagine a baboon, perhaps a bit of a mischievous presence during the day, settling down to sleep in a corner of your home, its chattering and antics replaced by quiet breathing. While charming, one can only imagine the occasional nocturnal commotion these primates might have caused. Historians still argue whether the widespread keeping of certain exotic animals as pets was truly common among the general populace, or if it was primarily a luxury reserved for the elite, a status symbol indicating wealth and access to rare creatures. Were these just pets, or were they also living symbols? Regardless, the presence of these animal companions, whether for practical reasons, religious reverence, or simply companionship, contributed to the unique ambience of the ancient Egyptian night, blurring the lines between the wild and the domesticated, and adding another layer to your sensory experience as you drifted off to sleep. After a night spent under the ancient Egyptian stars, perhaps visited by dreams of divine messages, or simply the mundane anxieties of life, the approach of morning would be a gradual yet unmistakable transition. You wouldn't be jolted awake by a blaring alarm clock or the screech of tires outside your window. Instead, the world would slowly awaken around you, inviting you gently back into consciousness. The first hint of dawn would be a subtle lightening in the eastern sky, a faint blush of color that would gradually intensify. The deepest darkness would begin to lift, revealing the outlines of familiar objects in your sleeping quarters. You might hear the first chirping of birds, a gentle symphony building, with the growing light, a natural alarm clock, far more pleasant than any electronic device. The air, which had cooled significantly during the night, would begin to warm again, carrying the faint earthy scent of the Nile and the promise of a new day. A mainstream historical fact here is the profound importance of the Qantas sunrise warning in ancient Egyptian cosmology. The rising of the sun god Ra each morning was not just a daily event. It was a cosmic rebirth, a triumph of light over darkness, of order over chaos. This meant that waking up wasn't just about starting your day, it was about participating in this sacred cycle of creation and renewal. You might find yourself turning towards the east, perhaps, offering a silent prayer of gratitude as the sun's first rays touched your face, feeling the warmth spread across your skin. For a quirky tidbit, consider the early morning activities that might have begun even before the sun fully appeared over the horizon. Farmers might already be heading to their fields, their distant calls echoing across the landscape. Women might be grinding grain for the day's bread, the rhythmic sound of stone on stone, a comforting prelude to the day. These sounds and activities, while mundane, were part of the ancient Egyptian morning chorus, a testament to the fact that life, even before the digital age truly began, before dawn. Historians still argue whether the concept of a strict workday, as we understand it with fixed hours and breaks, existed in the same way for ancient Egyptians, or if their daily routines were more fluid, dictated by the sun and the needs of agriculture. Was it a rigid schedule or a more organic flow? Regardless, the gentle awakening of the ancient Egyptian morning, steeped in both practicality and profound spiritual meaning, stands in stark contrast to the often abrupt and jarring start to our modern days, a final, soft descent into wakefulness. As the sun climbs higher, illuminating the vast landscape of ancient Egypt, we bring our journey through their surprisingly soothing sleep rituals to a close. You've experienced the cooling mud brick homes, the firm yet practical headrests, the unseen battles against tiny pests, and the profound spiritual significance woven into every nightly descent into unconsciousness. What we've seen is not just a historical curiosity, it's a quiet testament to how different cultures across millennia have approached one of humanity's most fundamental needs. The enduring legacy of these ancient Egyptian sleep practices, though seemingly alien to our gadget-filled bedrooms, lies in their deep connection to the natural world and their profound sense of purpose. They weren't just sleeping to escape the day. They were engaging in a cosmic dance, a spiritual journey, a renewal. Imagine for a moment how different your own relationship with sleep might be if every night was considered a small echo of the sun, God's journey through the underworld, a tiny triumph of order over chaos. This blend of practicality and profound belief meant that even the simple act of preparing for rest was imbued with meaning. From the careful placement of protective amulets to the understanding of dreams as divine messages, every step was a deliberate act of care and connection. Their technology for sleep wasn't about complex machinery, but about understanding natural rhythms, harnessing the climate, and relying on faith and community. It was a slow-paced, deeply sensory experience, far removed from our digital distractions and artificial light. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of chronic insomnia, as a widely documented ailment in ancient Egypt, was due to their different lifestyles, their diet, or perhaps simply a less rigorous classification of sleep disorders. Was their holistic approach to life, their connection to natural cycles, inherently more conducive to restful sleep than our hyper-connected, often sedentary existence? Regardless, there's a gentle wisdom to be found in their approach, a quiet reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most profound. They embrace the darkness not as something to be feared or fought, but as a necessary transformative phase, a time for the body and spirit to retreat, reflect, and prepare for the new dawn. The soft glow of the morning sun now fills your space, gently pulling you back from the sands of time. The rhythmic breathing of the ancient world fades, replaced by the familiar sounds of your own environment. There's a quiet comfort in knowing that for all our differences, the need for restful sleep for a moment of peace and unconsciousness remains a universal human desire. As the last lingering images of ancient Egypt drift from your mind, feel your own body relax. The weight of the day, whatever anxieties or thoughts you may have, can now gently recede. Let the soft, warm currents of peace wash over you, just as the Nile's gentle currents flowed through the ancient world. Close your eyes if they're not already and allow yourself to sink into a deep, comforting stillness. The journey is over, the story told. All that remains is the quiet hum of the universe and the promise of a peaceful, dream-filled night.